Hands behind your back. Now. Hanley shoved me forward. My knee hit the pavement first. The crowd froze. Phones rose around us instantly. Who are you? Hanley barked, standing over me, chest puffed with certainty. I didn't answer right away. I brushed the dust from my sleeve, slow, deliberate, letting the silence stretch. That uniform's a costume, Hanley sneered. You're impersonating an officer. That's a crime. Sergeant Pearson arrived, glanced once, and backed Hanley without asking a single question. My hand moved slowly toward my jacket pocket. The crowd tensed. Hanley's grip tightened on his belt. It was only a plain lanyard, tucked back inside. I didn't show it. Not yet. A teenage girl near the food trucks quietly lifted her phone, filming everything without a word. Stand up. Hands behind your back, Hanley ordered, voice sharp enough to carry across the courtyard. I complied without resistance. I understand, I said. Just that. Nothing more. The cuffs clicked shut. Somewhere behind me, a woman whispered, "This isn't right." Pearson radioed for a transport unit, voice clipped and dismissive, already moving on. My eyes found a young officer standing frozen nearby, uncertain, watching everything unfold. Rookie Officer Maya Sato hesitated, sensing something was deeply wrong, but said nothing. Hanley's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He ignored it, too pleased with himself. Behind us, a banner read, "Building Community Trust Together." Nobody looked up at it. They walked me toward the cruiser. My chin stayed level. My spine stayed straight. An older man in the crowd muttered, "I've seen her before, somewhere." Hanley's radio crackled. Dispatch was asking, urgently, for his badge number. He didn't answer. The cruiser door shut behind me. Somewhere, a clock had already started. 20 years earlier, I was the one standing in a courtyard just like that one, in a uniform 2 sizes too big, being told I didn't belong in it. I was 23 then, a rookie fresh out of the academy, assigned to a precinct that had never had someone who looked like me wear its uniform without someone asking to see extra identification, extra paperwork, extra proof that I'd earned the badge pinned crookedly to my chest. My training officer at the time was a man named Carl Wexford. He wasn't cruel in any way you could write up in a report. He was worse than that. He was quietly, persistently doubtful. He double-checked my radio calls. He rewrote my incident reports for clarity. He let other officers speak over me in briefings and called it just how the room works. I remember the exact moment I decided I wasn't going to spend my career trying to convince people like Carl Wexford that I deserved to be believed. I was going to become someone whose word didn't need convincing at all. I left patrol duty 2 years later, not because I couldn't handle it, but because I understood, with total clarity, that the problem wasn't my performance. It was the system evaluating it. So I went back to school at night. Public administration first, then a law degree I paid for 1 semester at a time, working private security on weekends to cover tuition. I spent the next 15 years moving through police oversight boards, civil rights litigation, and eventually a deputy directorship at the Department of Justice's Community Policing Division, always circling back to departments just like the one that had once made me feel like a mistake in my own uniform. 3 months ago, the mayor's office called. The city was in the middle of a reckoning. A string of excessive force complaints, a department under federal review, a community that had stopped trusting the people meant to protect it. They needed someone who understood policing from the inside and the outside. Someone who had lived both sides of the badge. They offered me the position of police commissioner. I said yes on one condition. Before I was sworn in publicly, I wanted 1 week to see the department the way an ordinary person saw it. No introductions. No warnings sent ahead. Just an old patrol uniform from my academy days, stripped of every marker of rank, and a quiet walk through the precincts I would soon be responsible for. That's how I ended up at a community safety fair on a Tuesday afternoon, standing quietly near the folding tables, watching how Officer Derek Hanley treated a woman in a uniform he didn't recognize. I already knew how this story usually ended for people who looked like me. I just didn't know yet how it would end for him. The week before the fair, I sat in my new office, still mostly empty, boxes stacked against the wall, my commissioner's badge sitting in its case on the desk, unworn. My chief of staff, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Nandan, thought the plan was reckless. You want to walk into your own department in an unmarked uniform and let them treat you like a nobody? Simone, if something goes wrong out there, it goes wrong publicly, on camera, before you've even taken the oath. That's exactly why I need to do it, I told her. I'm not interested in the department they show me at the swearing-in ceremony. I'm interested in the department that exists when no one important is supposed to be watching. She didn't like it. She agreed to it anyway, because she understood, better than most, that I don't ask questions I haven't already thought through completely. We picked the community safety fair specifically. It was low stakes on paper, cotton candy, canine demonstrations, kids getting fingerprinted for fun instead of fear. It was also, not coincidentally, staffed that week by Precinct 14, the same precinct that had generated 11 excessive force complaints in the last 18 months, all of them quietly closed without discipline, all of them involving the same handful of names. Derek Hanley's name appeared on 4 of them. Wade Pearson's signature appeared on all 4 closures. I didn't go into that courtyard hoping to find nothing wrong. I went in already holding the file. What I needed wasn't more paperwork. I needed to see, with my own eyes, whether the pattern in that file was still alive in the way these men carried themselves towards someone they assumed had no power at all. I put on the old uniform that morning in my apartment, the same one I'd worn 20 years earlier, slightly stiff from disuse, no insignia, no nameplate, no rank. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment before I left. I wasn't nervous. I'd stopped being nervous about rooms like that a long time ago. What I felt instead was something closer to inevitability, the quiet certainty of a person walking toward a conversation she already knows the ending of, long before the other person opens their mouth. I drove to the precinct courtyard alone, parked 2 blocks away, and walked in through the side entrance where the fair had already begun to gather its first crowd. 11 minutes later, Derek Hanley put his hand on my shoulder and shoved me to the ground. In the back of the cruiser, I didn't struggle against the cuffs. I didn't raise my voice. I reached, as much as the restraints allowed, for the phone tucked in my jacket's inner pocket, and typed a short message with my thumb, awkward but legible. It's happening. Same pattern as the file. Precinct 14, Hanley and Pearson. Confirmed on site. I sent it to Priya. I set the phone face down against my thigh, the way you set something down when you already know exactly what it's about to do. Through the cruiser window, I watched the courtyard scene grow smaller. Hanley walking away with the easy satisfaction of a man who believed the matter was closed. Pearson already speaking into his radio about processing. The fair continuing around them as if nothing unusual had just happened at all. That was the part that always struck me most. Even 20 years ago. How quickly a moment like this gets absorbed back into ordinary life for everyone except the person it happened to. I wasn't afraid. I want to be clear about that, because people often assume fear is the only honest reaction to a moment like this. What I felt instead was something quieter, a kind of clinical attention, the same focus I'd trained myself to hold during oversight hearings, cataloging every detail because I knew, eventually, every detail would matter. The way Hanley hadn't asked my name before shoving me. The way Pearson hadn't looked at my face before backing him. The way the young officer at the edge of the courtyard, I'd catch her name later, Maya Sato, had flinched at the shove but said nothing. None of it surprised me. It confirmed what the file already told me. But confirmation, I've learned, is not the same as proof. Proof needed to be built in front of witnesses, on camera, in a way that couldn't later be explained away as a misunderstanding. So I let it happen a little longer than I needed to. The cruiser pulled away from the courtyard, toward the precinct 3 blocks down. I watched the community fair banner shrink in the rearview glass, building community trust together, and thought, not without irony, that in about 40 minutes, that banner was going to mean something very different to the people standing under it. My phone buzzed once against my leg. Priya's reply. On it. Chief's office being notified now. Don't say anything until we arrive. I didn't plan to. At City Hall, Priya Nandan didn't wait for a callback. She walked straight into the chief of police's office without knocking, a printed complaint file already in her hand. "Chief Ramsey," she said, "your officers just detained the incoming police commissioner outside Precinct 14, in front of a crowd. On camera." Chief Ramsey, a heavy-set man in his late 50s who had run the department for 9 years without a single major scandal reaching the press, went very still behind his desk. "That's not possible," he said. "Nobody flagged an unmarked visit." "That was intentional," Priya said. "She wanted to see the department without an audience performing for her. She got exactly what she wanted to see." Ramsey picked up his desk phone before she finished the sentence. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, inside Precinct 14's processing room, Hanley was joking with another officer about some woman playing dress-up at the fair, his voice carrying easily across the open bullpen. Pearson stood nearby, signing off on the intake paperwork without reading it closely, the same way he'd signed off on 11 other complaints in the past year and a half. Neither of them noticed Officer Maya Sato standing near the doorway, arms crossed, replaying the shove over and over in her mind. She'd seen something in the woman's face in that courtyard. Not fear, not anger, something closer to patience, like someone watching a scene play out exactly as expected. Maya pulled up the body cam footage from her own vest camera, watched it twice, and noticed something that made her stomach tighten. The woman had never resisted. Not once. Hanley's report, already drafted and sitting on the counter, described active resistance requiring physical intervention. That wasn't what the footage showed. Maya didn't say anything yet. She wasn't sure who to say it to, or what would happen to her career if she said it to the wrong person first. But she quietly saved a copy of the footage to her personal drive, the way a person does when they suspect, somewhere in the back of their mind, that the official version of events is about to become very important to get right. Down the hall, Chief Ramsey's office phone rang 3 separate lines at once. Maya Sato sat alone in the precinct break room, headphones in, replaying the footage from her body camera for the 4th time. Frame by frame, the same details kept surfacing. The woman's hands had stayed visible the entire time. She hadn't pulled away from Hanley's grip. She'd simply lost her balance from the force of the shove itself. And in the 12 seconds before the confrontation began, Maya could see something she hadn't noticed live. The woman had been standing quietly near the community fair's donation table, reading a printed complaint statistics sheet the department had put out as part of its transparency initiative. She'd been reading, Maya realized. Not trespassing. Not interfering. Reading. Maya thought about the department's harassment training modules, the ones that always ended with the same disclaimer about protecting officers who report misconduct in good faith. She'd never fully believed that disclaimer applied to rookies. Not really. Not when it came to reporting someone as senior and well-liked as Derek Hanley. But something about the calm, unshaken way the woman in the courtyard had accepted the cuffs stayed with her. It wasn't submission. It was closer to observation, like someone taking notes on exactly how badly this was going to go and letting it go that badly on purpose. Maya thought about her own rookie year at the academy, about an instructor who'd once told her class, "If you ever see something you can't explain away, don't wait for permission to ask the question out loud." She pulled out her phone and drafted a message to the department's internal affairs tip line, the anonymous one, the one nobody in the bullpen ever admitted to using. Her thumb hovered over send for a long moment. She was still hovering when Sergeant Pearson's voice cut through the break room doorway, sharp and unusually rattled. "Sato, Chief's office. Now, bring your vest cam data." Maya's stomach dropped. For one terrible second, she assumed she was already caught. She wasn't wrong that something had already caught up with the precinct. She was only wrong about who it was catching. Down in processing, Hanley leaned against the counter, still riding the satisfaction of what he considered a clean, uneventful stop. "You believe that?" he said to another officer nearby, jerking his thumb toward the holding area. "Full uniform, no badge, no nameplate. People think they can just walk around looking the part these days." Probably some off-duty reserve trying to relive the glory days, the other officer laughed. Pearson signed the last line of the intake report without reading the narrative section closely. The same habit that had let 11 prior complaints slide through his desk without a second look. He initialed it, dated it, and set it in the outgoing tray. "She'll be processed and released with a citation," he said. Non-event. Neither of them noticed that the woman in question hadn't said a single unnecessary word since the courtyard. She sat in the holding area with her hands folded in her lap, spine straight, watching the precinct move around her the way a person watches whether they already know is about to change. A junior clerk walked past the holding area with a printed visitor's log in hand, glancing in briefly out of simple curiosity. Something about the woman's stillness made him pause. Not fear exactly, more like the instinct that tells you a room is about to feel very different very soon, even if nothing has happened yet. He kept walking. It wasn't his place to ask questions. Down the hall, Pearson's radio crackled, and a voice he didn't recognize, clipped, formal, carrying an authority that made him straighten instinctively, asked him to confirm his name, badge number, and current location. "This is Sergeant Wade Pearson, Precinct 14, he said, already feeling something shift in his chest that he couldn't name yet. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end didn't answer his question. It only said, "Do not release the woman currently in holding. Chief Ramsey is en route to your location. He is bringing the mayor's office with him." Pearson's hand tightened around the radio. "Copy," he said, though he had no idea, in that moment, what exactly he was agreeing to. The call came through Pearson's radio again 3 minutes later, this time with an instruction that made the color drain slightly from his face. "Sergeant Pearson, this is Deputy Chief Alvarez. I need you to personally escort the woman detained at the community fair to Conference Room B. Do not discuss the arrest with anyone outside your immediate chain until further notice." "Copy," Pearson said again, though his voice had lost some of its earlier steadiness. He walked toward the holding area, badge suddenly feeling heavier on his chest than it had an hour earlier. When he reached the cell, the woman was standing already, waiting, as though she'd expected the summons before he'd even received it. "This way," he said, unlocking the door. She said nothing as she stepped out, hands still loosely clasped in front of her, the same composed stillness she'd carried since the courtyard. As they walked down the hallway together, Pearson found himself glancing sideways at her more than once, trying to place something familiar in her face that he couldn't quite name. It nagged at him the way a half-remembered name nags at the back of the mind, close enough to almost surface, never quite arriving. They passed the bullpen, where Hanley was still recounting the dress-up cop story to a fresh audience of 2 junior officers. He caught sight of Pearson escorting the woman personally, and something about the sergeant's tense posture made him stop mid-sentence. "Sarge, everything good?" Pearson didn't answer him. He kept walking, eyes fixed straight ahead, the woman's calm footsteps matching his stride exactly, neither hurried nor hesitant. Outside Conference Room B, Deputy Chief Alvarez was already waiting, along with a woman in a sharp gray blazer holding a tablet, Priya Nandan, though Pearson didn't know her name yet. Alvarez's eyes moved to the woman beside him, and for one full second, his professional composure cracked entirely. "Commissioner Delacroix," he said, "I am so deeply sorry." Pearson's hand, still resting on the woman's arm out of habit, went completely still. "Commissioner," Pearson repeated, the word barely making it out of his mouth. I don't understand." His hand dropped from my arm as though it had suddenly caught fire. I turned to face him fully for the first time since the courtyard. I didn't raise my voice. I never do. 3 months ago, I said, the mayor's office appointed me to lead this department. I asked for 1 week before my swearing in to walk through it without a title attached to my name. I wanted to see how Precinct 14 treats people it doesn't think it needs to be careful with. Pearson's face had gone the color of old paper. "Sergeant," I continued, "you signed off on my intake report 11 minutes after Officer Hanley shoved me to the ground in front of a crowd of families and children, without asking my name, without checking a single detail, and without reading the narrative section closely enough to notice that it described resistance that never happened. I didn't know, he started. That's exactly the problem, I said. You didn't know, and you didn't think you needed to. Deputy Chief Alvarez stepped forward, still visibly shaken. Commissioner, I want to be absolutely clear that this does not reflect. It reflects exactly what it reflects, Deputy Chief, I said, calm and even. 11 complaints against Officer Hanley in 18 months. All of them closed without discipline. All of them signed off by Sergeant Pearson. I've had that file for 3 months. Today I simply confirmed it in person. Priya stepped in beside me, tablet already open. Body cam footage from Officer Maya Sato has been preserved and logged. Multiple bystander recordings have already surfaced online. Internal Affairs will need all 3. Down the hallway, through the conference room's glass wall, I could see Hanley being walked toward us by 2 other officers, still confused, still unaware, his easy confidence from an hour earlier completely gone from his face. He hadn't put it together yet. He was about to. Hanley was brought into the conference room flanked by 2 officers who wouldn't quite meet his eyes. He stopped just inside the doorway, confusion still written plainly across his face, searching the room for an explanation that made sense. Then he saw me, standing, no longer cuffed, no longer on the ground, addressed by Deputy Chief Alvarez with the kind of careful deference reserved for exactly one rank in this building. I watched the pieces assemble themselves behind his eyes in real time. The courtyard, the shove, the words he'd used, impersonating an officer, just following procedure. People think they can play dress up. Each phrase landing somewhere behind his expression like a stone dropped into still water. He started, and then stopped, unable to finish the sentence out loud. Police Commissioner Simone Delacroix, Alvarez said quietly, when Hanley couldn't. Sworn in privately 3 days ago. Public ceremony scheduled for next week. The room went very still. Even Pearson, standing near the wall with his hands loosely at his sides, seemed to fold slightly inward, as though trying to make himself smaller in a room that had suddenly gotten much larger than he understood. I didn't know, Hanley said finally, his voice cracking slightly at the edges. If I'd known who you were. That's exactly the sentence I needed to hear, I said, and for the first time since the courtyard, something in my own composure allowed itself to be plainly, visibly firm. You're telling me that who I am determines how I should have been treated. Not what I was doing. Not how I behaved. Just who I turned out to be. He had no answer for that. There wasn't one. An officer who needs to know someone's title before deciding whether to treat them with basic dignity, I said, has already failed the job, regardless of what happens to me personally today. Priya's tablet chimed softly. She glanced at it, then at me, and gave a small nod. Internal Affairs has pulled the complaint history, she said. 11 prior incidents. For bearing Officer Hanley's name directly. All closed by Sergeant Pearson without disciplinary review. Alvarez turned to both men. Both of you are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, he said. Hanley's face went white. The formal announcement came 2 days later, not in a private conference room, but in the department's main briefing hall, in front of every officer from Precinct 14 who could be assembled on short notice. Deputy Chief Alvarez stood at the podium first, reading from a prepared statement that named both officers, both incidents, and the specific policy violations under review: failure to verify identity before use of physical force, failure to properly document an incident, and pattern of conduct concerns tied to 11 previously closed complaints. Then I stepped up to speak, wearing my commissioner's uniform in full for the first time in front of this precinct, badge polished, rank insignia catching the overhead light. I didn't raise my voice. I never do. 3 days ago, some of you watched Officer Hanley detain a woman at our community safety fair for the crime of wearing a uniform without a nameplate attached to it, I said. I want to be clear about something before anything else is said in this room. This isn't about me. It could have been anyone standing in that courtyard that day, anyone whose face, whose posture, whose presence made an officer feel entitled to skip the basic step of simply asking a question before acting. I let that sentence sit in the room for a moment. The badge you wear is not a substitute for judgment. It's a responsibility that requires it. 11 complaints sat in a file for 18 months because a supervisor decided reading the narrative sections wasn't necessary. That ends today in every precinct in this city, starting with a full independent review of every closed complaint filed in the last 3 years. I could see Officer Miyasato standing near the back of the room, the same young officer who had frozen in the courtyard, now watching with an expression I recognized immediately, the particular look of someone realizing, in real time, that doing the right thing eventually gets noticed, even when it feels impossible in the moment. Her preserved body cam footage had become the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. "Officer Sato," I said, and watched her stiffen slightly with surprise at hearing her name from the podium. "Thank you for trusting the process, even when it would have been easier not to." The room stayed silent, absorbing everything at once. Hanley sat outside the briefing hall afterward, badge and radio already surrendered, waiting for his union representative to arrive for the formal disciplinary interview. He kept replaying the moment in the courtyard, trying to locate the version of events where he hadn't been wrong, where the woman's silence had been suspicious rather than simply dignified, where his instincts had been protecting the community rather than failing it. He couldn't find that version. It didn't exist. What haunted him more than the suspension, more than the internal affairs investigation now underway, was a detail Deputy Chief Alvarez had mentioned almost in passing during the briefing. That 11 complaints with his name on them had been sitting untouched in a file for 18 months, each one describing some version of the same pattern he'd just repeated in front of a crowd with cameras rolling. He hadn't remembered most of those complaints. That was the part that unsettled him most. He'd genuinely forgotten them. The way a person forgets small cruelties that never seemed to cost him anything before. Down the hall, Sergeant Pearson sat alone in an empty conference room, staring at a printed copy of the same complaint file, seeing his own signature at the bottom of 11 closures he barely remembered signing. He thought about the years he'd spent believing that trusting his officers' instincts over paperwork was simply good leadership, decisive, efficient, the kind of judgment that got you promoted. He was only now understanding what that judgment had actually been protecting, and who it had been failing, one unread narrative section at a time. A knock came at the door. It was Miyasato, holding a folder she'd been asked to deliver. She set it on the table without a word, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Sergeant," she said quietly. "I didn't want to be the one who noticed. I just couldn't keep pretending I hadn't." She left before he could answer. Pearson sat alone with the folder for a long time before opening it. The independent review internal affairs conducted over the following weeks confirmed everything the file had already suggested, and more than I had initially expected to find. Of the 11 prior complaints against Officer Hanley, 7 involved encounters with residents who, like me, had been assumed to be something other than what they were: a delivery worker mistaken for a trespasser, a retired schoolteacher mistaken for a shoplifter, a father waiting outside a school mistaken for a threat before anyone asked his name. Each complaint had followed the same quiet pattern of dismissal: a brief note, a signature from Sergeant Pearson, a closure marked "No further action required," despite body cam footage in 3 of the cases that, on closer review, told a very different story than the officer's written report. The bystander video from the community fair, combined with Miyasato's preserved footage, became Exhibit 1 in the disciplinary hearing that followed. It showed, in 11 uninterrupted minutes, exactly what I already knew it would show: a woman standing quietly, reading a public document, offering no resistance, no aggression, nothing that remotely resembled the active resistance written into Hanley's original report. The hearing board terminated Officer Hanley's employment 2 weeks later, citing falsification of an official report and a documented pattern of excessive force. His case was also referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges related to the false report. Sergeant Pearson was not terminated, but he was permanently demoted from supervisory rank, required to complete a full retraining program, and placed under an 18-month review period during which every report he signed would be independently audited. I didn't push for anything harsher than what the review board recommended. This was never about punishing two men more severely than policy allowed. It was about proving, in a way that couldn't be dismissed or buried in a drawer, that the pattern was real, that it had cost real people something every time it happened, and that the department could no longer pretend otherwise. Maya Sato was formally commended for her role in preserving critical evidence, and I personally recommended her for early consideration into the department's newly reformed oversight training track, the same track I wished someone had offered me 20 years earlier, instead of a training officer who rewrote my reports for clarity. Sergeant Pearson's demotion hearing was quieter than Hanley's termination, but in some ways it stayed with me longer. He didn't argue his case aggressively. He didn't claim the complaints had been fabricated or exaggerated. When the review board asked him directly why he'd closed 11 complaints without reading the narrative sections in full, he sat with the question for a long moment before answering honestly. Because I trusted the officers more than I trusted the people complaining about them, he said. I told myself that was just experience talking. I understand now that it was something else. It was, I think, the most useful sentence anyone said during the entire proceeding. Not because it excused what had happened, but because it named the exact mechanism that let patterns like this survive for years inside institutions that genuinely believed they were doing good work. His formal reprimand included mandatory retraining specifically focused on report review standards, along with the requirement that he personally reach out to each of the 11 complainants whose cases had been closed under his signature, offering a formal review of their original claims. 3 of those complainants, including the retired schoolteacher mistakenly reported as a shoplifter years earlier, chose to reopen their cases. 2 resulted in formal apologies and department policy citations. 1 led to a civil settlement. I read through those follow-up reports myself, one at a time, in my office late one evening after most of the building had emptied out. There was a particular kind of quiet satisfaction in watching a system finally do, slowly and imperfectly, what it should have done the first time each of those people asked to be believed. It wasn't triumphant. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like closing a door that had been left open far too long, letting something uncomfortable finally settle where it belonged. Priya found me still at my desk near 9 that evening, going through the last of the files. You could have delegated all of this, she said. I know, I said. I wanted to read every one myself. The public swearing-in ceremony took place the following week, on the steps of City Hall, in front of a crowd considerably larger and more attentive than anyone had originally planned for. News of the community fair incident had spread well beyond the department by then, not because I had sought that attention, but because the video, the reveal, and the swift disciplinary action had become, on their own, a story people wanted to understand. Reporters asked fewer questions about policy that day than about the woman who'd apparently walked calmly into her own department wearing an unmarked uniform to see what it would do to someone it didn't recognize. I kept my remarks short. I've never believed a long speech does more good than a clear one. I didn't take this position to prove a point about one bad day at one community fair, I said, standing at the podium in my full uniform for the first time in public, badge catching the afternoon sun. I took it because I believe departments like this one are capable of becoming what they claim to be on their recruitment posters. Protectors who ask questions before they act, who treat dignity as a baseline requirement, not a reward for people who look a certain way or carry the right title. I looked out at the crowd. Somewhere near the back, I could see Maya Sato in her uniform, standing a little straighter than she had in the precinct hallway weeks earlier. The badge is not the point, I said. The judgment behind it is. That's what I intend to hold this department to, starting with myself. I took the oath a few minutes later, hand resting on a small, worn book that had belonged to my grandmother, the same one I'd carried with me 20 years earlier on my first day as a rookie who wasn't quite believed yet either. When it was finished, the applause felt distant somehow, The way sound does when you're standing fully inside a moment you've been working toward for 2 decades without ever being certain it would actually arrive. I thought, briefly, of the courtyard, of Hanley's hand on my shoulder, of the silence in the crowd before anyone decided whether to say something. Some doors take 20 years to finally close the right way. 3 months later, I walked the halls of Precinct 14 again, this time in daylight, in full uniform, with no need to hide who I was from anyone in the building. The complaint numbers had dropped. Not to zero. I never expected zero, and I distrust anyone who promises it. But the mandatory narrative review policy I'd implemented across every precinct had already caught 2 smaller incidents before they escalated into anything resembling what happened in that courtyard. Officer Miyasato had been formally transferred into the department's new oversight training division, the first of what I hoped would become a much larger cohort of officers trained specifically to notice the moments that used to slip quietly past everyone else. I stopped by the same courtyard where it had all started. The community fair banner was gone now, replaced with new signage about the department's revised transparency policy, printed in plain, readable language instead of bureaucratic filler. I stood there for a moment, remembering the exact spot where my knee had hit the pavement, the exact sound of the crowd going quiet around me. It hadn't been about proving I was untouchable. It had never been about that. It had been about proving, in front of witnesses who couldn't later deny what they'd seen, that the pattern I'd once lived through as a 23-year-old rookie was still alive in this department, and that it could, with enough attention and enough patience, actually be changed. Not through anger, not through retaliation, through the slow, deliberate work of making a system finally look honestly at itself. I thought about the young woman I used to be, standing in an ill-fitting uniform, being told in 100 small ways that she didn't quite belong in it. I thought about how long it had taken to become someone whose words simply couldn't be waved away anymore. Some justice doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just walks back into the room, calmly, wearing the uniform it was once denied, and waits for the people who doubted it to finally understand exactly who had been standing in front of them all along. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next dramatic story. Tap like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching.